Every artist has a favorite pencil or pen that they prefer to use, and the hardness or softness of the lead or of the pen tip gives us different control over our line, and the quality of our line is everything to us. And now, Storyboard Pro offers us many different types of preset pens and brushes to work with, and the textures now have more of a look and feel of working on paper with different types of pens and pencils. I have this file right now set to animation numbering, and we are on Scene 1, Panel 9. But I'm actually going to open up a new panel right next to this. So as we start sketching, you can see what the lines look like. So when you first look at your drawing tools on the left, you'll see that there's a pencil, which is only used in vector layers. So notice if I go to a bitmap layer, the pencil disappears. It's not accessible. And a lot of artists are going to go for that pencil layer first because it's a pencil. And I'm going to recommend you don't, because it's not a very good looking line and there's no pressure sensitivity to it. I always use the brush icon, and I'm going to suggest that all of you do as well. So let's take a look at the different kind of preset brushes for both vector and for bitmap layers. So let's start with vector layers. So under your Tool Property tab, we've got brushes 1 through 4, which are solid brushes. So let's just pick brush 2. They're all the same feel except for the size. The number is the pixel size. So for instance, for 25, as I push down hard, you see it gets really thick. So if I'm drawing a character and I draw really lightly, it gets really thin. And if I push down harder, it gets a lot fatter. And it looks like it's an alias line. You got that little stair stepping on it. It's actually going to export to a beautifully smooth line. But on your screen, it's almost always going to look like an alias line, which is not the best looking line for us to be able to work with. Luckily, they also give us textured lines. So let's go use a textured pen here, 25 pixel. And as I draw on it, notice how beautifully smooth that is. In fact, let's make that a little bit thicker. I can change my maximum size here, and it's not going to affect my default, but I can adjust that as I'm working at any time. So now that's a 50. So now as I'm working, and I can work over it, and it gets darker and darker, and it's going to just have this great brush feel to it. A couple other brushes. There's one for chalk. So if I want to just color in an area, and if I want to keep working over it, notice it's going to get darker and darker, just like working with the edge of my pencil. Marker, it's got a nice textured feel to it, but it's got more of a solid edge to it. Or airbrush, if I'm airbrushing an area, nice soft edges to it. And of course, as I use different colors, that'll adjust completely. Now here's something I really want you guys to notice. I'm going to go back to the solid brush here. And let's talk just briefly about smoothing. You'll really see smoothing a lot when we're doing cross-hatching. So right now it's set to 0. So I'm going to do just some quick cross-hatching here. And when I release it, you see it shift just a little bit. That's as it's setting it in, and it might be doing a little bit of adjusting to the nodes that are in it. You'll notice that a lot. When I set it up high, let's set up over 60 for smoothing. I'm going to do the same thing. Watch what happens to these lines. So I'm going to do some quick cross-hatching with a curved line, and I let go. Look how much those lines change. That doesn't look at all what I drew. What's happening is the software, like any vector software, when you have smoothing set really high, it's going to eliminate a lot of nodes, and it's going to change the look of your line. I don't like that. So I keep it at 0 for when I need it at all. The only time I use vector lines is if I need to do something like perspective or editing the actual thickness of the line with the nodes. Otherwise, I prefer working on a bitmap. So let's turn off that vector layer, go to a bitmap layer, and now let's look at our different bitmap options. The defaults do change depending on the layer that you're on. So now our brush defaults, I've got our 20 pixel pencil. All right, that's nice. I'm going to make it a bit bigger so you can actually see the quality of the edge of the line as I push down on it. It's all solid black. So if I work over it, I'm not really seeing a difference in the color. Where I'll see that is if I'm using a textured pen. So there's my texture pen. Let's make that bigger again. So as I push down hard on it, notice as I work over it, it gets darker and darker, much more like working with an actual pencil. And that's because these texture pencils have the flow set lower. So for instance, the flow on my 25 pixel one is set at 50. If I make it all the way up to 100, it's going to give me more of a black line, where if I have it sit down lower, it's going to be a lot lighter. So as I work over it, it gives me a lot more control over making my line look darker and darker. Again, any change I make here under my properties does not change my defaults. Every time I click on it, I go right back to my default again. So chalk on here, I can just keep working over and over it, and notice it keeps getting slightly darker and darker. Got a good feel to it. Marker, just like we saw before, has more of a solid edge to it, but it's got kind of that wet feel. And then my textured airbrush, as I'm coloring, get a nice soft edge to it, and I can keep working over it and over it and over it. So the defaults that now they're giving us in Storyboard Pro makes my brushes look much more the way that I like to work with them. It gives me a much better looking line. I feel better about it, and it's less of a transition from working to paper to now working with digital.